So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. So what we want to do is cultivate cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. Let us begin chat. Wow, hold on a second. Is this better? Better, right? Best? Too dark? What do y'all think? What are we doing? No, not haircut, just showered recently. Good? Good, more looks green. Should I change? I'm not going to change, whatever. Okay. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. I'm a psychiatrist, but just a reminder that everything we discuss today on stream is intended to be for educational purposes only, and nothing is intended to be taken as medical advice. So if y'all have a concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. Sound good? Okay. So we've got a lot of cool stuff for y'all today. All right? Today's going to be a little bit different. So we're going to look at a couple of Reddit posts, but that's not really what our focus is going to be on. What we're really going to do is like dive into some relationship stuff. Not quite lecture format, but where do I even start? So like, we're going to talk about red flags, okay? We're going to talk a little bit about why red flags are sort of a scam. There's some sort of science behind it, which we'll sort of cover. But I think for whatever reason, like we're just going to talk about relationships, okay? Actually, let me just start over because I'm still trying to compose my thoughts. So over the last 48 hours, I've read about 200 pages of research on relationships. So on Wednesday, we did a stream where we talked about online dating. And we talked like some about like the problems with online dating. Sparked a lot of interest in the community. And people started asking questions and things like that. Like I got kind of curious about it. Thankfully, our research team has been helping me out a lot. So I've read over 200 pages of stuff about relationships in the last 2 days. And what I'd love to do today is basically synthesize that crap into a couple of like distillations that we're going to share with you. Okay? That's what we're going to do. So the first thing that we're going to do is talk about red flags in relationships, because this is a concept that's like really, really common. Next thing that we're going to do is someone was awesome enough to post on our subreddit in response to our Wednesday video. So we're going to try to like summarize a couple of things about dating apps like super quickly. Then what we're going to do, if we've got time and we've still got, you know, because we're going to look at a couple of other relationship related things. But what we're sort of trying to focus on a little bit is like just trying to figure out what of this stuff is going to be helpful to y'all. So hopefully this stuff will be helpful. Does that make sense? We've also got other posts about meditation and things like that. But like, we're going to like actually like, so at some point recently, I decided that we got to figure out this online dating stuff. Okay. Like, we got to figure this out. So this is one area that, in dating in general, this is one area that we've kind of been light on, honestly, in terms of like what we talk about, because it's something I just don't have a whole lot of experience on. Right. So like, I started dating the person who's now my wife like many, many years ago. We've been married for over a decade. And so like, I kind of like finished off my relationship stuff in terms of dating and things like that, like before this whole wave of online dating came. I'm not saying that to brag. It's not a humble brag, honestly. What it is like, so because I lacked personal experience in it, we decided, I just didn't know what to say, right? So people are like, this is a huge problem. Like, dating and finding like people, like finding someone to build a life with, and loneliness are huge problems in our community. And for too long, we've kind of ignored it because I didn't know what to say, because like I kind of lucked out. And I realized recently, like, that's not really good enough, right? So like, HG can't just be what Dr. K already knows. Like, that can't be what we are. We have to grow, learn, and adapt to the needs of our community and like this generation. So as a substitute for experience, I read a bunch of crap, and I can't guarantee that we can teach y'all how to fix this problem, but one step at a time, we're going to try to at least understand it and give y'all some kind of guidance into ideally how to fix it, right? And this is where I firmly believe that a lot of the information out there is not based in science. And so as we sort of look at all of these different like scientific research articles and stuff like that, as we sort of cross that with experiences of people in our community, hopefully we can get a distillation of like how the hell to navigate dating in today's world. And that's where, at the end of the day, my inexperience with it is no longer an excuse for like trying to tackle this problem. I got to give y'all a couple of caveats though. Because I don't have experience with it, there's a greater chance that I'm going to be wrong. We're going to have to lean more on y'all's experience. And so I really, really appreciate when people will post stuff about, their experiences or like whatever. Hopefully we don't get just like an absolute flood of that, but like, it helps us. It really does, because we have to like basically chat. We're going to figure this out together because Dr. K doesn't know the answer to this already. Okay. All right. So let's start with red flags. So the first thing to understand about red flags is that people think that there are red flags, right? So there's this assumption that in a relationship, there is this thing called a red flag. And what is the purpose of a red flag? The purpose of a red flag is to give you a signal of something that's a problem in the relationship so that you don't waste your time. So the red flag is built on the hypothesis, the fundamental hypothesis, that a future problem in the relationship can be predicted by a behavior in the present. Okay? That's the idea of a red flag. Then what happens is when people sort of come up with like, then people sort of like, are like, okay, so these are red flags. These are warning signs of problems that presumably, by the way, are also unsolvable, right? That's the other assumption with a red flag, is that it's unsolvable. Then what happens is we have like people who come up with articles like this one. So, okay, 7 red flags in dating you should watch out for, from like psych2go.net, right? So it starts with a quote with Aristotle, and then they like start to learning how to recognize these signs early in a relationship won't work out, or that someone is just too incompatible, can save us a lot of pain and regret down the road. So there's a kind of presumption that red flags are deterministic, that if there's a red flag, it won't work out, okay? And then they sort of come up with things like this. They always agree with you. They hide things from you. They don't prioritize you. They're dismissive of you. They easily get jealous. They make you second guess their feelings. Make you second guess their feelings or your feelings? I don't even know. They talk badly about their exes. These are red flags. So like, let's just think about what is the logical argument that this article is making. If you recognize these early signs won't work out, you should break up with them. So, like, what if this happens a single time? Like, if they make you second guess their feelings once, does that mean you should break up with them? If they talk badly about their exes, that means you should break up with them? If they easily get jealous, you should break up with them? They don't prioritize you? Like, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that if you text them and they don't respond right away, that they're not prioritizing you? How do you define prioritize? They hide things from you? So what does that mean? Does that mean that if we're on our 7th date and I want to look through your phone and you say no, and I want to see who you've been messaging, that means they're hiding things from you and we should break up with them? Like, do you notice your partner avoids talking about their feelings? Like, oh, so like if they're avoiding talking about their feelings, like that's a problem. It's not like we should give them space to like have their feelings and come to terms. So like if my partner's been sexually assaulted and they're not willing to talk about it and they're avoiding talking about their feelings, I should break up with them. Doesn't share too much about themselves. So if I'm just like generally speaking a private person, or do they keep you away from their friends or family? Maybe their family are toxic assholes. They always agree with you. How do you define always? I want Thai for dinner and so you're okay with eating Thai for dinner? Great. I want to do this and you want to do this? Great. We both want to play video games all day. We want to veg out? Great. Break up. Break up. Break up. So this is like, I don't understand where these are coming from. I don't even understand how to define this. Like, how do you know how to check this box? How do you know how to check this box? This is what happens. So why do these articles get published? Because our experiences in dating resonate with some of these feelings, right? So like when you read this, if you've been in a relationship with someone that doesn't prioritize you, you read this and you're like, damn straight, they didn't prioritize me. I should have seen it earlier. These are emotionally engaging statements that you can't base any kind of predictive model around. Like, do y'all get that? They're dismissive of you. So so like, how do you know if they're dismissive of you or you just feel dismissed? Does that make sense? If you feel dismissed, does that mean they're dismissive of you? Is there any contribution from you in any of these things? They easily get jealous. Well, yeah, like my partner, they get jealous so easily. I went to a party, I got hammered, I slept in the same bed with my ex. I swear to God, I only took all of my clothing off except for my underpants. The penis stayed inside the shorts the whole night. They get so jealous, like what the F? So this is the basic problem with red flags, is that there is no appreciation of your behavior as a contribution to these red flags. This assumes that a red flag is entirely within another person, can be seen, flagged, and then you kind of break up with them. So here are the problems with red flags, okay? The first is that there is like no relational component to a red flag. So this is something that we know through the science of relationships, is that a relationship, I know it's going to sound weird, involves two people. Two people. And that maybe their jealousy can be influenced by you. Right? Maybe the fact that they agree with you very often or they don't talk about their feelings much is because you don't know how to validate feelings or you problem solve all the time and you're actually not a good listener. All of these red flag kind of perceptions are based on like this idea that another person and their behavior are like not related to you in any way, shape, or form. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that red flags are deterministic. So this sort of assumes that like if someone does something, like they talk badly about their exes or they don't communicate with you, right? They're not honest about their feelings, that is something that cannot change over time. Whereas like, I hate to break it to you, but like no one's perfect. And the whole point of a successful relationship is about feedback and getting someone else to like change to accommodate you to a certain amount and you change to accommodate them to a certain amount. Do y'all get that? Like you can't, but what all these friggin' articles about red flags are doing is they're creating this idea in our mind that there's a perfectly formed human that exists out there. I just need to find it. And if I can find the perfectly formed human, I will be happy. And if there's any kind of imperfection, there's no sense of like growth or progress or change. It's like you gotta get 100% out of the gate or you're gone. And the more that we see these kinds of like relationship red flag articles, the more it like reinforces these ideas of like deterministic relationships. Okay, so that's like problem number 2. So problem number 1 is there's no like contribution from you into anything that goes on in the relationship, right? Like it's not you. It's like, oh man, they get jealous so easily. I keep on texting my ex and they're sending me dick pics, but this part, oh look, like they like psych2go.net said that they get jealous easily, so F them. There's no individual contribution. Second thing is that red flags are deterministic. Okay? And then like the third thing that's a problem with these red flags is that they're just not based in science. And they're not like measurable in any substantial way. It's like these summaries of crap that like resonates with you a little bit, and like so you read it and it gets views, but it's not like based in that I don't know how to measure it. They always agree with you. Like, what does that even mean? They're like not measurable. They're not scientific. They're not like even based in science. These are the 3 problems. So let's like take a look. So then I was like, okay, so like if this is kind of BS, like, is there actually science about it? It turns out that part of the reason that this is hard is because the science on it isn't actually great. So I did something silly. I typed red flag and relationship into PubMed. And these are the results that I got. Red flag screening for low back pain. Nothing to see here. Move along a narrative review. COVID-19 and periodontitis. The cytokine connection. Diagnosis of wild type transthyretin amyloid cardiomyopathy in Japan. Red flag symptom of clusters and diagnostic algorithm. Red flags to screen for malignancy and fracture in patients with low back pain. Systematic review. Oral curcumin with piperine as adjuvant therapy for treatment of COVID-19, an RCT. Varicocele, red flag or red herring? That sounds super interesting. So I was like, all right, let's try Google Scholar. So I tried like red flag and relationship in Google Scholar. Here's that red flag or red herring article. Pretty cool, right? Back pain, varicocele is up again. If you guys don't know what varicocele is, it's when you have a fluid-filled something in your testicles. Is laughing at the expense of victims and offenders a red flag? Humor and secondary traumatic stress. Seems like we're getting a little bit closer to it, right? Oh, look, this is interesting. Raising a red flag on dating violence. Evaluation of a low-resource college bystander behavior intervention program. Is animal cruelty a red flag for family violence? Investigating co-occurring violence toward children, partners, and pets. So, okay, like we're getting a list. So it does seem like, and then we even get this kind of stuff. The relationship between applicant experience and hiring. Human capital versus red flag predictions. This is about management, right? So like, as an employer, how can you figure out what red flags are? So like, and it turns out that there is some interesting information out there. So this is part of I didn't read all 200 of these pages. So it's great. So thank God that Richard White, Dr. White, never met the dude, but absolute boss, wrote a freaking dissertation about red flags in relationships. This was sort of like the motherlode. So thank God Dr. White published this crap. And it's like, it's a dissertation, which is really where you have to look for this kind of information. Okay? So it's really cool. Like they really dug into this, and the dissertation's fantastic. And then like we can look at a couple of other things, like from dating to mating and relating. Predictors of initial and long-term outcomes of speed dating. Cool. Dating in the fast lane, how communication predicts speed dating success. Cool. Predictors of romantic relationship formation, attachment style, prior relationships, and dating goals. Cool. So there is some evidence out there. We know some stuff. The problem is that like, it doesn't say anything like this, right? So like, if we look at some of these things, the first thing is that, red flags in a relationship have to do with things like attachment style. So this is this fundamental idea that like, depending on what your attachment style is, how you relate to other human beings can determine what red flags are. Something really awesome that Dr. White discovered is that there's like all kind. Let's go to page, I think it's 52. So like Dr. White discovered all kinds of cool things. Like, for example, that red flags are gender dependent and age dependent. So like a red flag for a man is not necessarily a red flag for a woman. So the truth of the matter is that there are some things that are considered red flags. So for example, animal cruelty. Dr. White determined that deviant behavior is evidenced by things like substance use, violence, prior criminal history, depending on which gender you are, having kids. Discover that there are things that are red flags. But the problem is that when you look at red flag research, it's really complicated. It's not like this thing is a red flag. So depending on your gender, so for example, like men that are viewed as non-masculine, women rate that as a red flag. What does that mean, non-masculine? That means things like not having, not being financially independent, living at home, whereas men will not view that as often as a red flag for women. So they're like gender-specific, subjective things. The other problem with Dr. White's research, by the way, is it's all subjective. It doesn't actually look at what leads to a successful relationship. It's all about perceptions of red flags, okay? So like the truth of the matter is that red flags are complicated and they can't be boiled down to these like simple things. The other issue with red flags is that I've seen a lot of relationships that are very successful that include red flags. So for example, as an addiction psychiatrist, I work with a lot of people who have been addicted to heroin. And like, I think we can sort of say that a lot of people will consider addiction to heroin as a red flag. I've also done things like work with people who are in jail. And so I've like worked with like people who are criminals, people who are felons, have been convicted of a felony, and they actually wind up with like successful relationships. So even if you have a red flag, it's not deterministic. So if you talk about your exes too much, maybe that's because you had like 2 really bad traumatic exes. And over time, a human being, I know this is going to sound kind of weird. It's going to sound kind of weird. Human beings can actually change. Like, I get that psych2go.net or whatever, or like a lot of people who talk about red flags in relationship don't really acknowledge this, that people can change. It's like, it's possible. And so there are a lot of things that, so for example, like when I started dating my wife, like I checked a bunch of red flags. I was like 25 and like had no job and was like being financially supported by my parents. And like at noon on a work day, I'd be sitting on my computer on the internet, which I'm still doing, by the way, and now that I think about it. Right? And even playing games during the workday. Right? So like this is the thing where like red flags sort of presume that people don't change, whereas they do. So this is like the big problem with red flags. So then like, I'm sort of sitting here and I'm sort of tearing apart this concept of a red flag. And so what people I think are like, then I was kind of thinking about this and I was like, well, then what the hell do I say? Do I just say the concept is stupid and leave them there? No, actually. So we're going to tell you what to do about red flags. But there's a big thing that I realized working clinically with people who struggle in dating and sort of really struggle with like finding successful relationships, who will do things like ignore red flags. And what I'd love to do with y'all today is talk a little bit about why we fall victim to red flags. Include a little bit of that relational component and give y'all some clues, not in the other person, but in yourself. What can you detect that can sabotage relationships? What makes you vulnerable to a red flag in the other person? Because there's a relational component, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the first thing that leads to, in my opinion, so this is not like based on research, this is based on sort of like clinical work, right? So I've worked with a lot of people who've struggled in relationships and things like that. So the first thing that leads to like lack of success in relationships is when you try to fix something in your life through a relationship. So if there's something that's deficient in you and you try to fix that through a relationship, that relationship is less likely to succeed. Number one, when you use a relationship to solve your problems. And what does that mean, your problems? Any kind of problem. So let's say that I lack confidence in myself and I have difficulty loving myself. If I'm using a romantic partner to fix that self-love, doomed to failure. I mean, it's not really doomed to failure because nothing is quite that deterministic. But in my experience, it's like you're starting off with a handicap. If I am using a romantic relationship as a means of financial support, independence, housing, things like that, more doomed to failure, right? Not 100% doomed to failure. And I'm not saying that romantic relationships can't be like, financial support and stuff can't be a part of those. What I'm saying is if you're using it as an antidote to that problem, if I'm homeless and the reason I enter into a relationship is to like find a place to live, and I've seen all kinds of weird crap happen, which is like, for example, in the United States, we have to pay for health insurance. And so I've seen couples get married so that one person can provide someone else with health insurance. And at the time, it seems like a good, reasonable financial thing. But like now the two of y'all have been dating for 6 months and you've gotten married for the sake of getting health insurance. And now the two of y'all are married. And like that comes with other strings attached. So there are all kinds of things that we do in relationships to fix something within us. I stay in a relationship. Here's another cardinal one. I'm lonely. And so I'm staying in a relationship to combat loneliness. Because as long as I'm with this person, I won't feel that crushing amount of loneliness. But then what happens is I become more dependent on this relationship as an antidote to loneliness. It doesn't become about the relationship anymore. And it's not about this thing where the two of us are building it together. It becomes about meeting my emotional need. And this is how you get these people who are stuck in relationships. Because they can't leave because they're afraid of what will happen when they leave. I have nowhere to live. I'll be alone all the time. Who's going to love me? Right? Like, when your relationship becomes the primary source for meeting your personal needs, that's when things become a problem. And this is different from someone building a relationship where, like, as part of the relationship, you can absolutely assign financial responsibility to, like, one person, right? You can do that. Like, that's okay. Like, you all decide together. So we're one unit, and as one unit, we're responsible for all these different things. So the very classic example is, like, child rearing versus, like, earning financial security. So these are two needs that we as a relationship unit have. Our kids need to be taken care of, and we need money. So how are we going to divide this thing? Some couples choose that I'm going to focus entirely on child rearing. You're going to focus entirely on money. Other couples will choose we're going to do half and half. Unfortunately, some couples choose I'm going to do both of them, and you're going to do nothing. Right? Like that's sometimes what ends up happening. But I'm not saying that a couple can't divide things in a particular fashion. It's just you've got to be super careful. Are you in this relationship to satisfy a personal need, or are you in this relationship for the sake of the relationship? And this is what causes you to ignore the red flags, right? The other thing is that it's not like people don't know what the red flags are, right? Like we know what, like, if you're with a partner who talks about their exes all the time and hits animals, like, you know that that's a bad idea. Come on. But why do you ignore it? Because of this kind of stuff. Because you feel stuck in the relationship because this relationship becomes, you start to get a secondary gain out of the relationship. And then it no longer becomes about the relationship. So red flag number one, within yourself, is if you're trying to fix something in you through the relationship. And once again, I'm not saying that the relationship can't help you grow. That's ideally what it should do. But that growth is still your responsibility. It's not like the relationship is an antidote to your personal growth. It's not a replacement for that or personal deficiency. Number two, you find yourself making excuses for the other person. This is the second relationship red flag that you should look out for in yourself. So I've seen this like time and time and time again. If you want to know like what really challenges a relationship, it's when one partner makes excuses for the other partner. So I'm a little bit biased here once again because of the background of substance use, right? So like one person has a drinking problem. And what does the other partner do? Makes excuses for them. Oh, it's not that bad. So if you're in an abusive relationship, oh, it's not their fault. I upset them. Right? Or like, oh yeah, they're really struggling. Like it was our anniversary and they spent all night playing games with their friends the night before. And so they like missed it. And like, they're depressed right now. So, like I got to cut them some slack and I want to be like a good boyfriend or girlfriend. Or so like, if you find yourself making excuses for your partner, that is a red flag within you. Right? There's like the flip side of that, which is that your partner doesn't take responsibility. So we could make our own article that says, here are red flags. Your partner doesn't take responsibility. That too is like, how do you measure that? So this is what I'm talking about is like, you have to be a little bit careful about cognitive bias because we're always prone to blame other people for a particular problem in a relationship. And that's very emotionally validating, which is why these articles are successful. They're always talking about what your partner is doing wrong, right? So we're going to sort of try to balance that a little bit by sort of thinking a little bit about what you could be doing wrong, how you could be contributing to this equation. Because here's the other thing is that you can't control your partner, but you can absolutely control you. So if you find yourself making excuses for your partner, that's a red flag. Now, this doesn't mean that things are deterministic. I'm not saying you should break up with them. That's probably where you need to do some kind of work and have some kind of conversation. Oh yeah, like, our friends like invited us over for dinner and I find myself making excuses for you all the time. Like, what's going on here? I'm covering for your ass and like, I can't continue doing that. Or I don't want to continue doing that. What are we going to do about this? Red flag number 2, you make excuses for your partner. Red flag number 3, there are lopsided compromises. So compromise is a really, really important part of every relationship because no two human beings are perfectly the same in terms of their capabilities. No two human beings are perfectly the same in terms of their desires. So when there's a capability gap and there's a desire gap, we're not saying quantifiably, we're saying qualitatively, right? So I want to play video games. That's all I want to do. You want to go hiking all the time. That's all you want to do. There's a gap between what you want to do and what I want to do. And so naturally, the right move is like some kind of compromise that's going to leave both of us not perfectly happy. It's the nature of a relationship. What you're signing up for is a life that you have to give crap up for. And hopefully the advantage outweighs what you sacrifice. There are also lopsided capabilities. So like my earning potential may be higher than yours. Your ability to cook may be better than mine. And so sometimes there's like some amount of compromise there too. We're not saying that one person has to do all the cooking and one person has to do all the working. Like that just depends on the individual relationship. But generally speaking, there should be some kind of compromise. A red flag in a relationship is when there is a lopsided compromise. When there is something that you are accommodating or they are accommodating. Because this could be like, you could be both sides of the table, right? So if I'm sitting at home, if you're cooking, cleaning, taking care of the kids and working, and I'm sitting at home being depressed, drinking all day and playing video games, that's a lopsided compromise. And we're not saying that one person is at fault there. Both people are at fault. Because one person is enabling the behavior, one person is doing the behavior. Y'all get that? So the more lopsided compromises you see, the more of a red flag it is. And that's where like you've got to figure out, okay, why are we making this lopsided compromise? Because the lopsided compromise requires two people to make. You can't lopsided compromise yourself, right? Like it requires your partner to like hold the other side. So if I never do the dishes, it sort of requires my partner to do more of the dishes. Or we just live in a messy place, in which case it's no longer a lopsided compromise, right? So these are the 3 things that you should look out for in terms of red flags. It's not just about the other person. And they don't do this, and they don't do this, and they don't do this, they don't do this. If you are thinking that way, that I need my partner to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and this is deterministic in nature, if they have any of these red flags, screw them. That in and of itself is like a red flag internally. That's going to lead to you being less successful in relationships. People who are hypersensitive to red flags, especially vague ass, emotionally conceptualized, non-scientific red flags, are the ones who are staying alone, learning about red flags, and like not able to form healthy relationships. Who is reading the article about red flags? Is it the person who's in a healthy relationship? Absolutely not. It's the person who keeps on dating the wrong person. And if you keep on dating the wrong person, maybe, like, what's the common variable there, right? Like, it's actually you. So it turns out that a lot of the reason that we keep on having problems with red flags is not in the other person. It's actually because of your perceptions and the way that you approach the relationship. Because if I need to date for the sake of like someone doing my laundry, I'm going to compromise and ignore different things that I probably shouldn't ignore. So the just to kind of try to balance things a little bit, the three things that you should look out for if you're concerned about red flags, like by all means, like there's actually some evidence-based stuff that we looked at, right? So we'll go into more detail at some point once we do a more thorough literature search, because interestingly enough, reading 200 pages of papers is not sufficient. That's just the start. So there are some things like cruelty to animals, which are a red flag. But here are the things that you should watch out for in yourself. First of all, don't try to fix problems in here through another person. Right? If you have crushing loneliness on the inside and you enter into a relationship and you don't want to leave the relationship because of the crushing loneliness in here, you're going to create some weird kind of codependent, unhealthy relationship. You'll also stay in relationships far longer than you should. Because as red flags keep popping up, the thought of being alone is so crushing that you just tolerate that crap. Because a lot of us wonder, why on earth is this person in this relationship despite so many red flags? It's because the relationship is meeting particular needs that I have. It's the price I pay to stay in the relationship. It's the benefit I get for staying in the relationship. Second thing is if you find yourself making excuses for the other person, right? Representing the other person, making excuses for them in the way they treat you, making excuses for them on their behalf with your family, with your friends, with their family, with their friends. The more you find yourself making excuses for someone, like the more there's rot on the inside of the relationship. I'm not saying it's not fixable, but you've got to start holding people accountable, including yourself. And like covering for your partner is a great way to enable bad behavior. We're not saying that it shouldn't be done some of the time. That's part of what a relationship is you cover for them and they cover for you. But if you're doing like a lot of covering and like the covering isn't temporary in nature, that's another big thing, right? Because if you're covering for them, it's okay to do that for some amount of time, but at some point, the other party needs to start taking responsibility. And sometimes when you cover for your partner, one of two things will happen. Either they'll do it more, or they'll realize that they shouldn't be doing it and they'll do it less. So which pattern are you in? Third thing is lopsided compromises, where generally speaking, a relationship doesn't have to be 50-50. In fact, most of the studies that I've read show that most relationships have lopsided power dynamics, which is actually okay. Not everything in a relationship has to be 50-50. In fact, the people who try to enforce 50-50 in a relationship tend to be relatively unhappy. It's okay for a relationship to be 60-40. No problem. But when you're making more and more lopsided compromises, that's a red flag. There's something going on here that needs to be addressed. So this is our initial take on red flags. And in terms of like, if you're struggling to find success in relationships, what we really recommend is that by all means, beware of what the other person is doing, but also look in yourself, because these are the things that you can change. You can stop making lopsided compromises. You can start making fair compromises. You can support another person, but you don't have to consistently make excuses for them. And we'll see this for years or decades, right? A lack of accountability on one partner's part, and the other person just enables that behavior. And the third thing is we oftentimes use relationships to fix or almost bypass fixing problems within ourselves. As long as I can find someone to financially provide for me, I don't have to become independent myself. As long as I can find someone to do my laundry, I don't have to do laundry myself. So those are the three things that y'all should watch out for. And I think if you start to work on those things, you will have better success in relationships. Questions? How do you measure compromising 60-40, 70-30? Great question, Pause on Trails. Here's the problem with measuring compromise is that the unit of measurement is going to be biased. So there's like very like classic sort of scenario about dishes in the sink. So every dish in the sink that your partner cleans for you, you don't weigh that benefit as much as what you weigh when you do a dish for them. So there's a lopsided measurement. And so that's where like, I don't think that enforced 50-50 is good, or even 60-40 or 70-30. Over time, like, I don't think the quantification of it really matters too much because there's just the instrument of your measurement is going to be prone to cognitive bias. So I think so this is where like, you know, there was a priest who once sort of gave some advice to a couple that was getting married. And they were saying that, you know, marriage is a 60-40 kind of thing. You give 60 and you get 40, and your partner gives 60 and gets 40. And that's what marriage feels like. Right? Because that's what you have to account for the cognitive bias. Can people with different worldviews last long? Adrianus Apples is asking 100%. You can have a very successful relationship with people who have different worldviews. The key, though, is reconciling those worldviews. So you both don't have to agree with things. You can have a successful relationship between someone who's religious and someone who's an atheist. It just involves communication. And this is part of the problem, is that we assume that people with similar worldviews will get along better. And there may be some advantages to that, don't get me wrong. But we have Christians divorcing Christians, and we have atheists divorcing atheists. We have Hindus divorcing Hindus and Muslims divorcing Muslims. We also have Muslims divorcing Christians, Christians divorcing atheists, and Muslims divorcing Hindus. I'm not saying that there may be like a greater amount of divorce between particular groups that are different. I'm not saying that there's no impact on it. I don't know the actual data. But we sort of assume, even the question of like, can people with different worldviews last long, presumes a deterministic nature. It presumes that there's nothing you can do. So that's where like, there are going to be all kinds of different worldviews. And some of those you may not be able to get a compromise on. But some of them, like through communication, you can sort of decide how you want to raise your kids. So if I'm an atheist and you're a Christian, like we can come to some conclusion about how we're going to resolve that. So if as a Christian, you're like, they've got to go to church, they've got to be baptized, everyone who's an atheist is going to hell. Like that's going to be hard to resolve. You know, like, so that's where there's like some amount of compromise. Good questions. Duck, ooh, is there always red flags in a relationship and can you completely avoid them? I don't think that that's a good strategy. So there aren't always red flags in a relationship because earlier we were talking about like, how do you measure them? Who knows? So this is what I'll say. No one's perfect. And the solution to people not being perfect is to not try to find someone else who's more perfect. The solution is like, instead of like avoiding red flags, which I'm not saying you shouldn't set limits on who you're willing to date, like especially if we're talking about animal cruelty and things like that. But this is where just remember that this is the other assumption is that the solution to red flags is to avoid them. Whereas like there's another solution, which is that you can work on them, right? You can give someone an opportunity to like grow and change. You can say, hey, I know you're addicted to heroin. I can't be with someone who's long-term like that. So like, I really care about you. I really love you a lot, but I need you to get sober. For this relationship to work, like I need to be with someone who's sober. And if you're not ready to make that decision right now, that's okay. I can't stay in a relationship like this. At the same time, like I want to give you the opportunity to let you know how I feel, and then you decide. And then the other person has to make a choice, right? They can say, oh, you're asking me to change who I am. This is what I love. It's how I relax. I don't want to change. In which case, y'all are not willing to compromise and you part ways. Or someone says, yeah, I know it's a problem. I've really been struggling with it for a long time. I haven't been able to do it so far, but I really want to. Will you please help me? And that can result in a super happy, healthy, long-term relationship. So that's where, like, I don't think problems in life necessarily need to be avoided. I'm not saying you should pick them up at every opportunity, but problems can be fixed. Avoidance is not the only answer. Would you provide covering for your partner? Yeah, so like simple, provide an example of covering for your partner. So simple example is like, I don't want to go to dinner with our neighbors tonight. I just want to sit at home and play Dota. So like that's okay, I think, if it happens occasionally, right? So there are times that I know, at least in my relationship, I cover for my partner and I appreciate doing it because I love her and I care about her. So I really like, like I'll take one for the team. It's like, yeah, like you relax, you have a good time. I'm going to go, like, I'm going to take the care of the kids. I'm going to, like, you don't have to worry about anything for the next 24 hours. I'm going to be like super dad. I'm going to go to the grocery store. I'm going to do laundry. I'm going to work and I'm going to put our kids to bed and I'm going to wake up with them and you can just take a day off. That's covering for your partner. But if I do that all day, every day, that's unfair. Right? So it's okay to cover your partner. I actually really enjoy it from time to time. Right? Like it's really cool to think that, oh, like this crappy task needs to be done. I can spare this person that I love from doing this task. That's awesome because I love her and I care about her and I want her to be happy in life and I can like help her be happy at the cost of myself. I'm actually okay with that. Presuming it doesn't happen all the time. Right? And presuming that it's reciprocated in some way. So I'll be super dad one day and do everything. And then a week or two later, I'll go and play D&D. And so I'll like leave at noon and I'll come back after the kids are asleep. So we watch out for each other. It's about reciprocation. Okay. How about other people instantly assuming something is a red flag about me? That's a great point, Diffuser. So that's where, so if you are someone who is like a felon or you use heroin or some other thing that other people think is a red flag, you sort of can't control their impressions, right? So if someone decides I'm not willing to date someone who's a felon or someone who is unemployed at the age of 25 or like whatever their red flags are, this is my point, is that everyone thinks about red flags. And we have a society that is like more and more sensitive to this concept of red flag. My assertion is that the concept of a red flag, and especially the way that we engage around it, is fundamentally flawed. Right? It's like this vague stuff that we can't really measure that may not be based in science. I'm not saying that they don't exist entirely, but the way in which we internalize these red flags is based on like our own emotional experience. Oh, I had a partner who didn't prioritize me and it hurt. So now I'm going to be hypersensitive to people not prioritizing me. And sometimes what that can mean is like if someone is busy and has other stuff going on and I'm feeling emotionally like needy in that moment, it's going to trigger all of this past trauma around like people not prioritizing me. And then what happens is like I project onto a situation a lot more severity than is deserved. And so like it's challenging, but that's what we're sort of trying to combat. So if people instantly assume a red flag about you, that's where I would say you may be able to work on it some, right? So if, for example, the red flag is like you're unemployed, or if it's like you use heroin, or if it's whatever, if it's that you are a particular race or ethnicity or whatever, like who knows? You can work on some of that stuff. So you can work on becoming more financially independent. You can work on becoming sober. So you have to decide for yourself whether that red flag is fair or not, and also like what you can do to change it. Why would you avoid red flags you know are there? Isn't that enabling too? I don't think so. I'm not sure. I didn't quite understand how that's enabling. No, because it's not avoiding red flags. I mean, punishing someone for a perceived red flag, I don't think is enabling. Okay, this is a great question. You are kept G is asking, how do you deal with a very dependent person who's getting more and more dependent as time goes by? If I try to fix fights by taking a small break and reflecting on things and trying to make myself better, it makes more issues because the person can't take it being away. Yeah, that's where like I think conversation is really, really important. And sort of talking to someone who's growing more dependent. So here's like the cycle of dependency. So you notice that the person you're dating is getting more dependent. That burdens you more. And so you try to pull away. And as you pull away and try to foster their independence, they start to panic. Their emotional energy increases. As their emotional energy increases and ramps up, you usually end up caving. And as you cave, it reinforces the dependency. So then what happens is like you're kind of reinforcing that like, if I start to pull away and I'm forcing you to be independent, what you're training your partner to do is to like ramp things up emotionally, make you feel guilty. And then what happens is the relationship gets worse and worse and worse and worse because as they ramp up emotionally, they get the right behavior from you. They get the support that they want, which in turn like reinforces the dependence. Because if I try to like push away or pull away and like try to make you independent, you start to fall out, like your partner starts to fall apart more and more and more and more. I can't do anything. You see how much I'm suffering. And then you come rushing back because you feel guilty. And what are you doing in that moment? You're actually reinforcing that the more dependent they act, they have to like escalate their dependency to get you to stay. And so it like makes things worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So how do you deal with it? Couple of things. The first thing is you have a conversation about it, hopefully non-judgmentally. You can say, hey, here's what I'm noticing on our relationship. Like, what's going on? What's your experience of it? When I start to pull away and I don't like answer your text for a day, how does that make you feel? Right? So you have to like understand, y'all both have to understand what the dynamic is. Then what you got to do is ask them like, do you want to change this? Like, yes or no? Because like this is becoming difficult for me. And then what you sort of do is as you start to like set your boundaries, you've got to keep them. So that's where like, as the emotional dependency kind of like escalates, you've got to be able to, hold fast. And a big part of that is like having predictive conversations. So telling your partner, hey, like this feels like I need some space, but oftentimes we're not concrete about what that is. So it's really hard for partners to manage. So if I say like, I need some space because you're becoming too emotionally needy, the other person is like panics, right? Because they don't know when that's going to end. So oftentimes setting limits around it is really important. Hey, I'm going to take a weekend to myself. It has a duration. I need you to be able to hold it together for a weekend. Right? So it's time limited. That's really, really helpful for people who are emotionally dependent. And then come Monday, you sit down together and you're like, well, how was the weekend for you? Was it really, really hard? Do you think you can handle that? Do you think it should have been shorter? Do you think it could be longer? I'm trying to understand. It was really helpful for me, by the way. This is what I felt like some degree of relief. I was able to recharge my battery some. I care about you. I love you. I want to be able to support you, but like, I feel like I'm running on empty. I don't think you're a bad person for that. I recognize that you have emotional needs and we need to figure out some healthy way of like working on this over time. Because I am committed to this relationship. I want to stay committed to this relationship, but some of that involves like managing some of my emotional needs, like is a tension with your emotional needs. What are the other solutions that we could think about? There may be something like therapy or something like that involved. But I think a big part of it is that we sort of reinforce the dependency without realizing it. So if a kid wants to watch TV and I say no, and they throw a temper tantrum, and then I give them the TV to calm them down, what is that reinforcing? That's actually reinforcing temper tantrums get me the TV. And so over time, what I'm going to see is more temper tantrums, not less. Even though in the moment, I'm trying to stop the temper tantrum. Does that make sense? So the same thing can happen with emotional dependency. So as they escalate and you feel guilty and you cave, you're actually creating more emotional dependency down the road. Make sense? Okay. Energy vampirism. Dan 2L saying energy vampirism and a blocked fourth chakra are my red flags. Okay. So Gundown is saying, what do you do if that escalation leads them to panic or anxiety attacks? Great question, Gundown. So let's look at this question very carefully. What do you do if escalation leads them to panic or anxiety attacks? So here's the question. Whose responsibility is their panic attacks and their anxiety? So in that question, you will understand what the answer is. Because oftentimes what we do is we accept responsibility for someone else's mental health. And the moment that you do that, if you're accepting responsibility for it, then it's your problem and you've got to control it. The problem usually in emotionally dependent people is that that dependency requires you to like agree to it. Right? Where like their anxiety is actually not, I mean, should you support them? 100%. But ultimately, like their mental health is their responsibility. Or it should be more their responsibility, or it should be 50-50 responsibility. Right? So I consider, at least in terms of like my relationships, I consider myself somewhat responsible for the mental health of the people around me. I have a duty to try to support their mental health, but I can't do all of it. Right? They have to accept responsibility too. And what happens in dependent relationships is that the person who they're leaning on accepts 80% of the responsibility, 90% of the responsibility. If it leads them to anxiety attacks, it leads them to anxiety attacks. How are they going to manage that? Right? That's where the two of y'all can come up with a plan. Okay, if you can't take a weekend off, if I can't take a weekend off and it leads you to anxiety and panic attacks, over the next month, you need to start seeing a therapist. Let's do that. And that's when, if they don't do that over the next month, that's when you need to have a conversation about like, I'm willing to do my part, but I need you to be willing to do yours. And I don't know how this is going to work if you can't, like, I can't carry this relationship by myself. And that sends them into a panic attack. And that's where like, I'm sorry. And then you've got to like pull away. Right? So, because in that situation, what's going to happen? They're going to have a panic attack. You're going to cave. Oh, no, it's okay. You see that? It's tricky. It's super tricky. Okay, let's look at something else. Dr. K, oh, this is great. Hudant T is asking, what can I do if I am the dependent part of the spectrum? You can start to accept more responsibility. You can even sort of like recognize. So I think a big part that people who are dependent miss out on is the time limitation of the boundary. So this is the kind of thing where it's like, you know, even if you think about, you know, a kid who's afraid of the darkness. As a parent, I don't want to say, hey, you need to learn to be okay with the darkness, and I just abandon them. I tell them, hey, I know you're scared of the darkness. I have to go to the bathroom. So I will be back in 60 seconds. And I know it's going to be a little bit scary, but I'll be right back. They can handle that. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. Then it's like, I have to go change out the laundry. I'll be back in 2 minutes. They can handle that. And so as the dependent person, what you can actually do in that situation is like, if you feel yourself becoming too dependent, you can have a conversation. By the way, do you feel like I'm dependent? What do you think I could do to change that? Like, what's some amount of independence that I can handle? Okay, let's take a weekend where I'm not going to call you. I'm not going to text you. It's going to be terrible for me. Please don't call or text me. Like, let's just spend one weekend and see if I can handle it on my own. It's going to be super hard. And they're going to say, oh, you don't have to do that. No, I want to do that for my independence. But please, can we meet up on Sunday evening for dinner? So you sort of like, you leave the mothership for a little while, right? And you handle it on your own, and then you come back to the mothership. That's okay. How can you know the right period of separation? Like, is it a weekend, a week? With practice, right? So how do you know what's the right amount that a kid can like handle darkness? So you start super small and then you ramp up. Okay, let's move on. These are such good questions. So Gaming Comics is asking, how do you ignore thoughts of are they okay during the break? You don't ignore the thoughts. You acknowledge the thoughts, right? So you can acknowledge to yourself, hey, wow, am I so worried about them? So worried. I want to check up on them. I want to check up on them. I want to check up on them. Can I find the trust and faith in them to not check up on them? Can I tolerate my own anxiety? That's the antidote. It's not to ignore the thoughts. That's going to have the opposite result. If you ignore the thoughts, they're going to grow and grow and grow and grow, and they're going to break through your attempts at ignorance. So what you've got to do is acknowledge, wow, this is really hard. Can I survive another 24 or 48 hours? How am I going to survive another 24 or 48 hours? Let me watch a movie. Let me go for a hike. Let me do this. Let me cook. Let me do laundry. I've got to occupy my mind. And then, you'll manage it. The tolerance of anxiety is a very, very important skill to develop. And it's the same way that a child tolerates the anxiety being in the darkness, you have to tolerate your own anxiety. Okay, let's take a look at something else. All right, so we're going to close this one, I think. And we're going to move on to... not that one. Cool. Okay. So this is neat. Advice discussion after Dr. K's talk on dating apps. So, hey, community, I, 22M, am a longtime lurker of this community. After hearing Dr. K... Hey, thank you for coming out of the lurking and posting and contributing. We appreciate it. After hearing Dr. K's talk on dating apps, I wanted to talk about some nuances that I felt he didn't touch on. First of all, I agree that communication skill in dating, just in every part of life, is one of the most important skills to work on, and that is not looked at enough. My main gripe is that online dating, I feel like a lot of men, doesn't even get to the communication part. I average 1 to 3 local, non-bot or non-Instagram, Snapchat, OnlyFans farming matches in the first month after creating a profile. After these few weeks, I average 0 matches and have to create a new profile. To Dr. K, these apps have a big problem with men to women ratio and how the algorithm tanks visibility of your profile. Because of this, women can cherry pick profiles and don't participate much in chatting and planning casual meetups or dates. Women using their profiles to boost their other online social media followers or OnlyFans subscriptions is also a huge but different problem. Of course, I know not all women do this. I just want to point out my experience on these apps for years. Also, you can put filters on distance to other profiles. I didn't understand why Dr. K talked about this being a huge issue specifically for online dating. So Dr. K shows research that the way we fill in a profile does not matter. Within my many years on the dating apps, I agree. I get the same amount of matches with different types of profiles. No/funny earnest bios mentioning hobbies, bios mentioning physical attributes, lots of pictures, goofy selfie group pictures. I've tried different types of swiping methods, liking all profiles, only liking profiles with bios, with pictures, with people that I find attractive. Again, no change in the amount of matches. Now, when I succeed to go on a date, which happens about once or twice a year pre-COVID, I mostly find it a fun time. I could describe myself as an introvert who likes to socialize. With every date so far, the other person always kindly declines a second date. I've then asked on different occasions what they thought of me to get a better understanding why. They respond that I was kind and respectful, that I was fun to have a chat with, but they weren't interested to go further, and that they say they weren't ready yet to genuinely date someone. I very much respect that. I wouldn't want them to feel forced to go on more dates if they don't want to. Now, to get back on the topic, I also hear I'm fun, kind, respectful, calm communicator. So do I just need to go on more dates to eventually find someone who does not want to date me more than once? But with the pace I have matches and eventually dates, it can take years. I'm really at a loss. Okay? So they offer more context, but we're going to kind of pause here for a second. So here's the central point that I was trying to make. Actually, let's start with this. Let's start with a couple of observations. The first is, what is the outcome that the dating profiles the dating apps are looking for? You can even hear it, right, in this person's thing. What is the outcome that they're measuring? What's the outcome that they're trying to detect? They're detecting the outcome that they're looking at is matches, right? Everything about this is, nope. People are saying, Dates, engagement, nope, incorrect. It's matches. My profile doesn't affect matches. These are the matches that I get. Matches, 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 matches. So the first thing that's happened is dating profiles have shifted the target on us without us even realizing it. It happened so quickly and so rapidly that we completely lost track of it. And now everyone's looking at matches. What was the original goal of a dating app? What was the goal of a dating app? The premise of the original dating apps, and the premise of dating apps still, is this. There are a million people out there. One of them, or some of them, are right for you. By using all of these filters ahead of time, we can find the right person for you. Their general argument was that if you go and date for 10 years, you may never find the right person because you're going to waste all this time going through people who are incorrect only to find the one who's correct. And so by measuring all these things, by building a profile and by matching you, we can accelerate that process. You will find a relationship or love faster than you would in the real world. Due to our matching algorithms, you will need to go through fewer people to find the right one. Do y'all get this? This is the general premise. What has actually happened in dating apps? The exact opposite. How many people do you go through now to find the right one? It's escalated enormously. You know, people would date, 10 people, 20 people, 30 people before getting married? Like, who knows what the average is? This is we have to do a ton of research on this, okay? How many people do you go through now? Way more. So the fundamental premise of the dating app is actually inverse. The promise that they give you and what they deliver is the exact opposite. It's like getting a job where every hour that you work, you pay them money instead of you getting money. They're like, hey, our system will make it easier for you. You will have to go through fewer people because we're going to pre-select. We're going to look at like your religion, and we're going to look at your race, and we're going to look at your goals, whether you have kids or not. As we check all these boxes, you will have to go through fewer people. The alternative is you have to go and meet other people, and you have to talk to them, and you have to go on 4 dates to figure out if they have kids. We're going to simplify that process by doing it from the get-go. And the result that they create is not that you have to go through fewer people. You have to go through more, way more, astronomically more. So here's the first thing to understand. This is what I was trying to say. Dating apps have this assumption that the crap that you put into your profile has some impact on whether you wind up in a relationship or not. And where does that assumption come from? It's because you can only put particular crap into the dating profile, right? There's I don't know how to say this, but you can put your race, you can put your ethnicity, you can put whatever, you can put pictures, and we assume that those things correlate with finding a successful relationship. It turns out that those are not the things that correlate with a successful relationship. Let's look at some science. The measurement of perceived relationship quality components, a confirmatory factor analytic approach. This is what correlates with success in a relationship. This is the kind of crap: satisfaction, commitment, intimacy, trust, passion, love. This is factor analysis. There's a lot of science behind this crap. This chart, Model 1, single factor. Model 2, 6 uncorrelated factors. This chart does not go into your dating profile. If you want to understand how to make predictions about matching with someone properly in terms of forming a relationship, this is the level that you have to operate at. Right? This is not the actual information that it takes. Predictors of romantic relationship formation, attachment style, prior relationships, and dating goals. So now we're getting a little bit closer, right? Maybe dating goals does the transition from not dating to casual dating or committed dating was mainly predicted by prior dating success with some support for a potential role for the additional role of the desire to form a committed relationship. So the transition from not dating to casual committed dating was mainly predicted by prior dating success. Let me ask you a question. When you fill out an app, when you make a profile in an app, does it ask you how successful you are in dating? Does it show other app, as part of someone else's profile, does it show you how successful they are at dating? because that's what's actually like scientifically correlated with it. Right? There's also things like attachment style. Does it show you what the attachment style is? Because it turns out that attachment avoidance, but not anxiety, was predictive of not entering into a committed relationship, even with rival predictors included. So if you're looking for a relationship, do you get to see whether the other person has anxious attachment or avoidant attachment? Because this is actually what predicts relationships. No, what they show you is what they can collect. And somewhere along the way, based on what they can collect, is what we start. It's sort of like we can't measure what's in your bank account, but we can measure the size of the wheels on your car. So in order to determine whether you are a good candidate for a loan, we're going to measure the size of the wheels on your car because we don't know how much money is in your bank account. It's idiotic. We are starting to form predictions on relationships with what we can measure, even though what we can measure or what we can display doesn't actually correlate with what succeeds in a relationship. And so let me ask you something. If you design a system in which what you measure and what you display has no correlation in a relationship, what impact do you think it would have on people's success at finding relationships? You would assume that it has no impact. And what was the original premise of dating apps? It was, hey, if you filter all this crap ahead of time, we'll make it easier on you. You don't have to date 20 or 30 people. You don't have to talk to 20 or 30 people. We'll help you get there faster. And instead, what we see is the opposite effect. Now you have to talk to 300 people, 400 people, 500 people, 1,000 people, 1,500 people. It's almost as if their system is worse than like the baseline. And we wonder, why is dating so hard now? It's because the system is actually designed to produce a completely different result. I don't know what to say. Like, the system sucks. And we have data to support that the system sucks. The promise that the foundation that these apps were built on is creating the opposite effect. If we pre-filter, if you tell us whether you want to have kids, whether you like hiking or not, and how you spend your time, people will be able to see that, and the people who are interested in that kind of thing will be able to select you. Ergo, you will have fewer rejections, right? We're going to only find the people who like the stuff that you do, and we're going to match you together. But now you get more rejections. And this doesn't even start to include like the crap from the bots and the OnlyFans and social media kind of crap. Right? That doesn't even touch that. So dating apps, and this is where they tricked us. Because then what they did is they stopped looking at relationships. What they looked at was matches. And even if you go back to that post, you can rewind and like find it again. Matches, 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 matches. They changed the instrument of measurement to something that when we signed up for the dating app, we weren't trying to maximize our matches. We were trying to maximize our relationships. And they like switched what they measure on us. It's like, oh, no, we don't care about the money in your bank account. We're going to measure tire size. Tire size is what we're going on now. And then everyone started doing it because that's what they can control. That's what they can influence. That's what their measurements can allow us to do, is match. But that's not the same thing as a relationship. Somewhere along the way, we sort of assumed that more matches leads to more better relationships. Y'all get that? So this is the fundamental problem with dating apps, is that the reason that we use them and the promise that we're sort of given on a fundamental level does not actually, they don't do what we use them to do, because they can't do that. And so like this has happened so quickly and so rapidly that like we've been all taken by surprise. Does that make sense? We're actually like, it's harder to date. We get rejected by more people. We actually have to look through more people. And so then one of the interesting questions, and then why the hell does anyone use it? This is really fascinating. So I'm going to give you all kind of, the reason we use it is because it's simple, the cost of using an app for 1 minute and the availability of using an app for 1 minute is incredibly low. The cost of using an app over the course of 1 year or 2 years is way higher. And so the apps are, what they do is, like, if you think about how to meet someone, like if you want to find someone, there's a very high upfront cost investment for a particular day. I got to shower, I got to shave, I got to make social plans, I got to go to this party, I'm going to meet some people there. So it's like 4 to 5 hours of prep for like one opportunity of a questionable result. Whereas like I can be taking a dump this morning and be swiping on Tinder. And for 5 minutes, I can swipe and look through profiles. So they make the accessibility of the illusion of progress. So the illusion of progress is so accessible that like we just do it very easily. It's sort of like, you know, if you look at a slot machine, like slot machines have terrible odds. Why the hell do people play slot machines? Because all it takes to play a slot machine is to pull a lever. The upfront cost is so low to engage in this low probability of success behavior that people keep doing it. And then the other thing that slot machines figured out is we can add ding, ding, ding. It's not like a slot machine has an RNG, random number generator. Boom, lose. Boom, lose. Boom, lose. Boom, lose. And what did the dating apps do? You got a notification. You got a match. It's pulsing. It's just designed just like a slot machine. Bing! Right? So that's why we use them. Because the dating app came along and say, hey, if you want to like try to go meet someone, who the hell knows whether you will or not? You're going to have to shower. You're going to have to shave. You're going to have to shave your legs. You're going to have to get a new dress. You're going to have to put on makeup. And then like you may meet someone who's a complete idiot. Could be a complete waste of your time. But while you're in your slippies and you haven't shaved or washed any part of your body in 72 hours, we can help you get one step closer. Bing! And that's it in a nutshell. What's the deal with dating apps? That's it. Questions? Yeah, Spencer 444 is saying, not even a lever, just press a button, 100%. So XXRox7 is asking, how do we test for compatibility? This is how you test for compatibility. Look at it. This is what you got to do. This paper I'm sort of misrepresenting in some ways, but I picked it purposefully because of its complexity. But this is how you test for it. So there may be matching out there. The problem is that like the matching, this is the other like big thing that people don't realize, is that there's an assumption in dating apps that your subjective impression is going to correlate with some amount of success. Y'all get that? Like they assume that you know what you want, or you know that your preferences will actually like, your subjective preferences will actually be what you're looking for. Right? So like, just to give you all an example, you know, there's this kind of common perception that men will date women like their moms and women will date men like their dads. So like, even if we assume that's true for a moment, when you're filling out a dating profile, that's what your actual preference is. Let's just assume that's true for a moment. We're not saying it is. Does the dating profile let you select for that in any way in your mind? Of course not. Right? So there's all kinds of stuff that we may be able to like actually select things for, which is cool. But like, there's an assumption that we know what those are subjectively. Whereas if you look at things like attachment, so if we know that, for example, attachment style correlates with like dating compatibility, there's an assumption that a human being knows what their attachment style is, which is chances are we don't. So the other problem with a lot of this research is when we look at what correlates with success in dating, this is stuff that people usually don't know about themselves. So the fact that I'm the one that's creating it as opposed to a psychologist who's doing a personality analysis and doing some kind of like matching system there, which if y'all remember, we looked at that management paper about like red flags in interviews. That's where it becomes kind of interesting. Like that's what the resolution of data you may need. And there's also an assumption that you subjectively know what you're looking for. So it's interesting because if you look at other matchmaking services historically, you'd have a matchmaker, right? And you kind of tell them what you want, but a matchmaker will like look at you and recognize particular things about your personality and recognize what kind of thing will actually be compatible for you. And so that's the presumption of a matchmaker. The matchmaker used to also makes a claim of a value add, that if you actually literally pay me money, I will help you find a good relationship. Indian matchmaking on Netflix is excellent, by the way. Love it. If you guys are interested in that, it's cool. Questions? Indian matchmaking? Do you think dating apps have any positives? 100%. So the key thing to remember about dating apps is what they actually offer and what they deliver. And if you want to engage in that, they're great. So for example, they're a great way to recruit for social media, get cash from people, or get subscriptions on OnlyFans. They're fantastic for that, right? That's why I think that so many people do that kind of crap. They're great for bots that are looking to connect with people and maybe phishing scams, right? They're good for that too. They may be great for things like, you just have to remember what they're good for, which is like they may be great for potentially hookups or things like that. They're great for like starting conversations and connecting you with people that you would otherwise never meet, right? So like that's actually really cool about dating apps is like they will connect potential people that in the normal course of their social interactions would never encounter each other. And those people could be very compatible. It's just like, if I go to church all the time and like I would never get the chance to meet someone who like goes to mosque all the time, right? Like I may just never run across them. So I think there's a lot of good stuff that they're for. I think the challenge is that they claim to be good at, we use them looking for a particular thing and it doesn't give us that thing. And then we get really frustrated by it because we had this assumption that they were good for that particular thing. So it's not that they're bad. It's just, what do they offer? What do they promise? And what do they deliver? And when you use it, what are you looking for? Right? So like they're also good for other things, which is that I can start to do some kind of relationship building in my jammies not having showered in 2 days. They're fantastic for that. Great. Love Recklessly is saying the people I've dated from dating apps who I already knew from my past, but we never considered dating. That's actually a very, not very common, but that's something that I hear is actually really good, where people will like connect many years later and they'll actually end up having a healthy relationship. And they're like, hey, I had a crush on you in the 7th grade. And it's like 10 years later. The other person's like, oh, like I had a crush on you too. And then you're like, lol, want to get together? Want to screw? DTF? And they're like, yeah. Right? They're also good because they allow like a lot of people who do have things like social anxiety to start to form relationships. So sometimes it's a lot more comfortable for people, like, so there's a lot of good stuff there. So Dallas JSC is saying, my family states they want me to be with a girl who is a 10 out of 10 on the scale of attraction, and my last 2 exes apparently didn't reach that bar. How do I avoid their influence on my relationships? You can't avoid their influence on your relationships. You have to acknowledge it and counter it, right? So this is where like a lot of people are looking for a solution of avoidance. How do I avoid thinking particular thoughts? Like your family's influence is going to be there, right? So what you've got to do is like counter it. Very practically, you can sort of ask them, what is the foundation of like a healthy relationship in your mind? What are the advantages of a 10 out of 10? Like, what's the priority list? Who determines 10 out of 10? You can talk to them about all that stuff. And you can also ask your family, like, if I'm happy with someone who's like a 7 out of 10, like, what would y'all think about that? What's wrong with that? And that's where they'll probably say things like, well, it reflects poorly on us. I see. So the goal of my relationship is how it affects you. That's your priority in terms of who I date, which is how it makes you look. Thanks for sharing that. Now I understand what's important to you. Would you be surprised if my primary goal in a relationship is not how it reflects on you socially? What do you think about that? And that's where they're going to get real squirrely, and they're not going to want to say those things. And the way that you talk to them is going to be open-ended questions and non-judgmentalness, and that's when you'll sort of get all these weird impressions. Inkbringer's asking, my friend's boyfriend is hated by her family for supposedly not being good enough for her, and it's super toxic. Why can't family mind their business? They are minding their business. Their family is their business. Right? Think about it for a second. More practically, you can set limits with them. And the other really crazy thing here is, like, I know it's shocking. Sometimes, I'm not saying this sarcastically, honestly, sometimes when your family is concerned about the person that you're dating, like, they may know better than you do, right? Sometimes they may know better. We just don't consider that possibility at all. It's inconceivable that the person that I have chosen to date, I could be making some kind of mistake. It's inconceivable that my family knows me better than I do. It's inconceivable that my parents who have watched me grow understand what my weaknesses are. It's inconceivable that my parents who have more experience at marriage than I do understand what it takes to form a successful, healthy, long-term relationship more than I do, and are making a calculated guess, and the conclusion that they come to is different from my own. There's just this assumption that your family is wrong in that situation. Whereas if we really think about it, right now it's kind of weird. When we really think about it, like, they may actually know better than we do. Now, that has to be balanced a little bit, because sometimes there's the presumption that since they have more experience, they know more than we do. And they do know better. Going back to the other person who's like, you need a 10 out of 10. So there's like some balance there where it's like, they may know some things that we don't. They may be aware of some of our weaknesses. And also, they may have a set of priorities that we actually don't care about. So that's where, like, it's not like one is right or the other is right. It's just we have to be really self-reflective and hopefully communicate with them about what their concerns are and try to, like, learn from their mistakes so that we don't have to make them. And at the same time, like, establish our own priorities from a calm, centered place where we can sort of, like, set limits with our family. It's tricky. But there's kind of this assumption that I know what I need for a successful relationship. Whereas if you, like, really look at it like that, that's not an assumption that we necessarily know is true. Y'all get that? Like, sometimes, like, we're really bad at picking romantic partners. That's why the divorce, like, if we were so good at picking romantic partners, I don't know that the divorce rate would be like 40 to 50%. Yeah, Rag AZ is asking, signs a relationship is beyond repair. One very simple sign that your relationship is unsalvageable and is beyond repair. And that's you're the only one who's trying to repair it. Most fundamental thing that is required for relationships to be repaired is the effort of both of the people involved, or more if you're in an open relationship. That's the most consistent thing that I would say. A relationship cannot be salvaged by one person. So Ramin RV is asking, how about when your parents want you to marry with your culture, within your culture, religion will disown you if you don't? That's where you have to decide what's more important to you. Your family disowning you, or, like, adhering to them and not being disowned? Like, what's higher in the priority list for you? Disowning by your family or being with the person that you're with? This is the other thing. So a lot of people who are faced with this scenario have a very short sense of time. People think disowning is forever. Whereas I've seen this a lot where, like, if you're 24, disowning feels like a long time. Your parents are like, we're going to disown you. And then, like, if you do it 5 years later, like, you may be surprised at how much people are willing to come to the table. Like, when you have grandkids and they're like, you know, sometimes people will, like, mend those fences. Sometimes the threat of disowning is like, stuff doesn't last forever. And sometimes it does. I'm not saying it's always going to be like that. Sometimes they disown you and it's like, screw them. And sometimes you don't want to repair things. But there's this presumption that if you disown someone, you disown them forever. Whereas, like, honestly, in my experience, especially when we've got these like cultural, like these strong cultural values, right? Family is important. Family is important. Family is important. You marry someone and you're like, all right, you can disown me. And then like y'all may come to a new dynamic equilibrium where you've like set a particular boundary and they like call your bluff and you call their bluff. And then a few years later, you're like, well, we kind of miss each other and we kind of love each other. And like, you've got a grandchild now. And like, do you ever want to meet them? Does that make sense? Yeah, so drop stuff. And then when they want to reconnect, you say no? Sure. So you can say no if you want to, or you can say yes, or you can say I'm not ready yet. Forever is a very, very long time, and human beings tend to change their minds. So, like, don't worry about being disowned. I'm not saying that it's not going to happen or that they'll ever come back or that you'll want them back. But, like, oftentimes, especially when it comes to family, I'm sure y'all know this, family members will make vows to each other, which they rescind over time, right? Never again. If you ever do that again, I'm done with you forever. And then like, we're like, I said forever, but I didn't mean forever, right? Like, let's be honest, like that's pretty common. Right? So your family disowns you and oh yeah, like you have a grandson now. He's 5 years old and he's at the top of his class. He's in math class with the 7-year-olds. Can you believe that? Do you ever want to meet him? He's such a smart boy and he's so good at math. He's good at math like you are. Right? Genes have a strong pull. The ties of family is what keeps you bound, but sometimes especially if we're the kid, we don't realize that it binds our parents all the same. People are saying manipulation. Yeah, like look. If someone else shows up to the battlefield with a sword, like you've got to show up with a sword too, right? No, I mean, you guys call this evil. I don't think it's evil. It's just if you guys have grown up, I mean, so this is my experience as like an Asian. Like this is it's not evil. It's like standard practice for Asians. Emotional manipulation, face saving moves. You call it manipulative because it's face saving. Right? Like you got to give your parents like an out, which is like, oh, like look at how like I'm giving you the opportunity to be proud. You hate me because I married the wrong person, but like you want to be proud of your kid who's good at math. Let's set those two things side by side and let them war inside you, right? And then you come to the conclusion. Yeah, so it's me again. 5 is saying, as an Asian, this is survival. I completely agree. If you guys really want to get emotionally manipulative, they say he's so talented at math, but I don't have the time to teach him. It would be really nice if you could teach him some math because I know you're really good at it. And he's so gifted. You really want the nuclear bomb of manipulative relationships? That's it. When people are saying, oh, they're like, oh, find him a tutor. Oh, yeah, we have found him a tutor, but just none of them, he's just so smart. He really needs someone who's like exceptionally good at this stuff to teach him. Right? So like now suddenly it's like, it's not, because this is what happens. It's like, you cut me off. Screw you. I'm never going to talk to you again. Instead, no, I need your help, Papa. I need your help. Your grandchild is so bright. He needs you. You'll get it? Like, Yeah, like you all can call it playing to the family ego. Right? We can also call it face saving. And even Sun Tzu talks about this. Sun Tzu says always give your opponent an opportunity to escape. Always give him an out. Smart dude, Sun Tzu. All right. Okay. Let's talk. Okay, it's almost time. Y'all want to meditate for a little bit? What are we doing? Burp. Grimthor 32 is asking, is alexithymia a concern in relationships? Absolutely. Alexithymia is a concern for you. And if it's a concern for you, it's a concern in relationships. So alexithymia is the inability to understand your internal emotional state. You're essentially colorblind to your own emotions. And it causes problems in relationships because you don't realize that your emotions are like influencing your behavior. And you can't vocalize them, you can't talk about them, you can't process them. And so they're almost like pulling strings from the shadows. And we never see the puppet master. And it's very infuriating for both you and your partner. So it's a huge problem in relationships. Ask Dr. K to check his phone. Okay. Apparently, I'm supposed to react to a tweet. Let's see what Elon Musk is saying now. Psychedelics and MDMA can make a real difference to mental health, especially for extreme depression and PTSD. We should take this seriously. Yeah. I mean, I think there are parts of society that do take this seriously, which is why you're able to tweet this. I don't know what he's replying to Jim Cramer and Inside Pharma, but yeah, I mean, I think we know that, right? Like, this is not, I don't know how to say this, but I sometimes have this problem where like I discover things that I think are revolutionary, but I'm like a decade too late. Okay. So I recently started listening to Snoop Dogg and I was like, wow, Snoop Dogg is really fantastic. And sometimes I feel like Elon Musk does this too, where and it's not a bad thing. It's just sort of like, he's like, wow, like, yeah, I mean, like people have been saying this for a while, right? We sort of know this can make a real difference in mental health. There are very promising studies, especially for things like PTSD. So especially the reason that psychedelics and MDMA are like really promising for PTSD is because PTSD doesn't have good pharmacologic treatments. You can do some things like adrenergic medications and things like that, like adrenergic blockers that will help with particular symptoms like nightmares. But in terms of PTSD, what we really need to do is integrate the trauma into ourselves, like in a healthy way. Digest parts of it, discard parts of it, and like become a survivor. And some things like psychedelics will alter our kind of self-perception. Which is cool. So I think one thing that Musk does that's pretty nice is that so MAPS has been working on this stuff tirelessly for like 3 decades. The one thing that I got to credit Musk for is that when he starts talking about it, a lot of people pay attention. So, you know, there's definitely a plus there where it's like he's talking about it. Now a lot more people are going to be looking at it. I'm curious whether he purchased some kind of stock in some of these companies like a couple days before. Right? So I remember reading something about how I think Musk bought a lot of Bitcoin and then said Tesla was going to take Bitcoin as payment and then made a bunch of money. And then unclear, I don't know if he sold it afterward. And then he said, by the way, nope, we didn't do that. We're not going to take it as payment. And then it dropped. But it'd be curious. But, I think at the end of the day, like, he's raising awareness of an issue that I do think is absolutely important. So, like, that's a win. Right. And for all the people here's one thing that I'll say. And hopefully y'all understand this too, because we should understand this. The internet loves to judge people. We love to judge people based on what they tweet, based on what we think of them, based on what we read about them on Kotaku. We love to judge people. We love to judge people's motivations. We love to assume we understand why they do what they do. If there's one thing that I hope we've done on this stream, it's to show people that someone that you judge has a lot more complexity to them. There's a lot more that goes on, and that a lot of our judgments are unfair in some way. That they're humans just the way that we all are. And like, one of the things that actually makes me a little bit sad is that, like, Elon Musk is at the top of the list for people who don't deserve compassion. If anyone wants to crap on Elon Musk, there's 1,000 people that are ready with their pitchforks. Like, we sort of, like, the more successful someone becomes, if they're not likable, right? If they're, like, warm and likable, like, people like Paul Rudd, it's like everyone loves that guy, right? Like Keanu Reeves, everyone loves him. So they deserve our compassion. But if someone isn't likable and fluffy, then suddenly, like, they don't deserve our compassion. Oh, because they have so much money, or because they do this, because they do this, because they do this. And it's your choice. I just encourage you to be a little bit, critical of your own thought process. Right? So my experience working with all kinds of people, worked with billionaires and worked with criminals and homeless people and random people from the internet and people who have, government employees, worked with a lot of different people, men, women, transgender people, people who are Muslim, people who are Hindu, people who are Christian, people who are atheist. I think people are just people. And we love to, like, not give them their humanity. Now, I'm not saying that some people don't make it hard. Some people do a lot of things that are very judgment prone. So it's easy to judge them. But, like, I don't know. Like, I think just the one thing I've learned, and this is what you learn, is being a doctor. It's not just being a psychiatrist, it's being a doctor. Like, people get cancer. And there are social determinants of health. So for example, people with better medical care, better health habits, things like that, which oftentimes correlate with socioeconomic status. So poor people oftentimes get more cancer than rich people, which is a sad truth. But at the end of the day, when you get cancer, you get cancer. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. That too is sort of arguable, right? Because, like, rich people can potentially afford treatment, poor people can't. So there's, caveats to what I'm saying. But, death comes for us all. And sickness comes for most of us. And, like, as Joe Abercrombie says, it's the great leveler. And that's when you realize that everyone's just human. Okay. Let's meditate. What do y'all want to do? Logan Nine Fingers analysis incoming. I just love Joe Abercrombie's books. Fantastic. I'm rereading The First Law. I was surprised I'd forgotten how good it was. So what kind of meditation do y'all want to do? Let's think about, is there relationship meditation? Anahat with all the green. Someone's doing their homework. Sure. Let's do this. So it's interesting though, because Anahat Chakra is not actually about relationships. The Swadhisthana Chakra governs relationships. So let's do, we can do Anahat Chakra. All right, so let's do, this is just Wikipediaing the Anahat Chakra. So we're going to do Anahat Chakra Tarataka today in honor of all of the green. So let's explain what Tarataka is. So Tarataka is fixed point gazing. And what we're going to do is look at something without blinking. So I'm going to show you all an image. We're going to look at it together. And what I want you all to do, I'll guide you through it, but we're going to look at the Anahat Chakra and we're going to like stare at it. We're going to notice different things about it. And then we're going to close our eyes and we're going to focus on the after image. So this is a really interesting principle where there is a certain amount of signal that your eyes can transmit, and then you run out of a particular pigment in your eyes, and then it takes time to regenerate. And so when we look at something for a long period of time and we close our eyes, we're left with an after image, which is sort of like, it's complicated, it has to do with ocular physiology. But essentially we'll see an after image because of the way that our eyes handle pigments and things get extinguished. So for some amount of time, we'll see an after image. We're going to just focus on that after image. In terms of people who say, what do you mean focus on it? You'll find that there's a certain amount of like, if you hold on to it too tightly, it'll disappear. But you have to kind of relax and let it float to the surface. You'll kind of see what I mean. We go into a lot of detail with this in Dr. K's guide if y'all are looking for more information there. But let's go ahead and look at this Anahat Chakra, okay? So what we're going to do is sit up straight, close our, and we're going to close our eyes. Okay, so I have the image here, but we're going to start with eyes closed. So take a few deep breaths. Center yourself. And now slowly open your eyes. And what I want you all to do is focus on the image in the center, the character, Yum. And now what we're going to do is look at the outer, so we're going to keep our eyes focused on the center, but we're going to let our attention actually go to the periphery of the image. So what we're going to do is actually look at the tips of the petals. Or not look at, put our attention on the tips of the petals. So I want you to continue staring at the center, ideally without blinking, and focus on the tips of the petals. See the tips, but look at the center. And then notice that there are characters as you move inward. And then see the ring. And then see the triangles. And the macro shape of the 6 triangles. And then see the hexagon on the inside. And the white borders around the ya. And then the center. Now we'll see the character in its fullness, moving back outward to see the hexagon, and at your own pace move out. See the shape of the Star of David? The ring? Ooh, almost blinked there. And the petals. And now see the whole yantra. Try to zoom out with your attention. And breathe. And one more breath. Close your eyes. And now in the screen of your mind, you'll notice the after image. It'll look glowing. And just try to discern whatever shapes you can. And with your eyes closed, focus on them. Try to concentrate on the image. See it for as long as you can. If you lose it, that's okay. With practice, you'll be able to hold on to it longer. You may be able to be surprised by how you can find it again. Over time, the image will fade. But as your attention increases, you can kind of hold on to it for longer. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like the more subtle it becomes, the harder it becomes to see, the more it requires your attention, your focus, and your ability to zoom in. And so each time you do this practice, it'll strengthen your ability to like hold your mind on one thing. And now put your palms together in front of you. Rub them together. Cup them over your eyes. Take a deep breath in. And out. And then open eyes. How was that, chat? So pretty cool, mesmerizing, epic, and also it didn't work at all. So remember that there are different meditations for different kinds of people. And that's okay. So Trataka isn't for everyone. Some people really enjoy it. Some people find that their eyes are a good way to focus. I personally find that Trataka is great for teaching you being calm and focused. So when we think about being focused, we think about a certain intensity, a certain stress to it. But how do you remain calm and focused, which is sort of like what the flow state is? It's through practices like Trataka. Because if you're too intense, the image will shatter. And if you're too calm, the image will disappear. Poof, turn into smoke. It requires like a chill focus to keep in view. It's kind of like bringing it in and out of focus with the right amount of calmness and the right amount of attention. So it sort of trains your mind to do that. That image was from Wikipedia, by the way. So it's just Wikipedia's Anahat Chakra. Quali's asking, what are we supposed to see? Why did so many see boxes. I saw boxes too. I have no idea. So what are we supposed to see? Not sure. That's where there's probably something about, as I was mentioning, the rhodopsin pigments in the eye, that as they get extinguished, we create these interesting after images. There's probably like a biological or neurobiological component to what we see. But what's really cool is like the yogis sort of figured out all that stuff, and they designed images that will cause you to see particular things. And in theory, seeing and focusing on particular objects will cultivate particular kinds of like energies or stimulate certain parts of the brain. We don't really know that scientifically though. So I have seen one study, for example, that looked at Anahat Chakra meditation, which is heart chakra meditation, which is essentially what we just did, specifically for depressive mood disorders, and seemed to find good results. But arguable whether those results are actually superior en masse compared to like any other kind of mindfulness. We do know, for example, that certain kinds of mindfulness techniques are useful for particular kinds of conditions. So for PTSD or borderline personality disorder, we know that grounding techniques tend to be pretty effective. So there does seem to be some kind of that specificity. I personally believe in that a lot. So I've developed specific regimens for people with addictions that when taught, people seem to do better. But that's not really something that I've done a mass level study on. So take that for what you will. Who do y'all want to raid today? New Lord X is asking, why does everyone say that root chakra is red, but Sadhguru says it's yellow? You'd have to ask either everyone or Sadhguru. I don't know what Sadhguru thinks or why he thinks it. One last thing I want to just comment on before we go. So a lot of people are wondering, I saw this question a lot where, so if we were talking about red flags earlier, and a lot of people are sort of wondering, okay, if we think about relationships, there's what we see in the other person and kind of what we see in ourselves. How do you know what your internal biases are? I think that's a really good question, something we'll kind of explore a little bit more. But it's tricky, right? So it's like really hard to sometimes see yourself. And hopefully some techniques like meditation will help you sort of do that, become more aware. Fitzy here? Sure. Let's do that. Gorp usually stops streaming around this time, right? All right, let's raid Fitzy here. We're playing Hades. Oh, by the way, before we go, thank you to everyone who responded to my post. We didn't have time to go into it today, but I may post some stuff. So this is kind of interesting. We made a post on Reddit, or I made a post because I was curious what people think happens after we pass away. So we made this post. Oh, no. Where is it? No. About what do you think happens after death? And it's really interesting. So thank you very much for everyone who kind of like commented on this. I read a lot of the responses. It's actually super cool because one person actually describes they've been clinically dead. So it was really interesting to hear their experience. The other interesting thing is that there are actually studies on reincarnation and like what happens after death and post near-death experiences and stuff like that, which is super cool. So thank you very much for people who responded. I really enjoyed seeing what people sort of think about this stuff. And part of what I really value about the community is actually like that we can approach these things and kind of learn from each other. So thanks a lot to everyone. And we'll see y'all. I think we're out Monday and Tuesday for an event, but we'll see y'all hopefully on Wednesday. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.